A disturbing 4th of July message from the leader of the world's first Islamic terrorist state, known as IS now. The man previously known by just a few photographs emerged to deliver an on-camera sermon on our Independence Day as he calls on Muslims around the world to wage jihad from a city that was once under U.S. control, where many U.S. soldiers and Marines fought and died. Many are now wondering, how did this group get so far, including our next guest, who spent plenty of time reporting from that city and spending time there on the ground with our troops. Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North is host of War Stories and author of the new book, Counterfeit Lies. Colonel North, welcome. Good to have you here tonight.
Martha, good to be with you. I wish it were a different subject, but Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi's sermon from that mosque in Mosul, which was once under American control, is a slam. It's a terrible reminder of the waste of young soldiers, airmen, Marines and sailors in places like Mosul and Fallujah and Ramadi, where Al-Qaim, where I covered them. I look at this and I remember a place called Vietnam, a war we did not lose on the ground on those battlefields, but literally in the corridors of power in this city right behind me. The disaster of Saigon 1975 was horrific for the people of Southeast Asia. It was also destructive to the U.S. Armed Forces. President Nixon ended military conscription, the draft, in 1973. But we were just becoming an all-volunteer force in 1975 when those U.S. helos were lifting off the roof of our embassy. And it took 6 years and the election of Ronald Reagan before we could rebuild our military. Today is the very first time since the American Revolution where everyone in a U.S. uniform is a volunteer. And unfortunately, the guys doing the psychological warfare for the Caliphate really are good. They've terrorized the civilian population in Iraq with mass killings, just like Hitler, forcing captives to dig their own graves. The capture of these cities is a major hit at the morale of the U.S. military. I don't think our president, our commander-in-chief, who's headed to Texas tomorrow, gives a damn about it. Unfortunately, many of the guys who fought in places like Mosul and Fallujah and Ramadi, where I spent most of my time during that war, see, as those cities fall into the hands of terrorists, that no one in the Obama administration is talking about the effect on our troops coming into service or the ones who are still there. It's a terrible scene.
Wow. What has happened in that area is huge. I mean, the establishment of an Islamic terrorist state is something that Osama bin Laden never had. You know, a pulpit to stand up on and a people to call out to who were somewhat organized. They have money, they have power, and as you point out, precious little is being said about it, and we haven't really done anything at all to stop them at this point.
You know, before I came in here, I went through the wires, all of the wires, the international and domestic wires. There's not one story coming out of Iraq right now. Everything else is dealing with things domestic, things like China threatening their neighbors, the Philippines, Japan, the economy, and Israel, the only real ally we have in the Middle East, now under attack at this very minute. But Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, who, as you just point out, now heads the world's first terror state that he calls a caliphate. If I wrote a novel like this, my editors would say, hey, get real. And yet we've now got senior terrorism officials in the United States State Department saying, hey, look, if Maliki has to deal with the Russians and the Iranians to hang on, let him do so. Yeah. It's a terrible outcome of a failed presidency.
I mean, now we have Iran and Russia getting together to try to give military support to al-Maliki, and this president, our president, has been, put under some pressure to do airstrikes, to go after this group in some way, to diminish their power in this new caliphate, and he does not seem to be interested in any of those options.
Well, unfortunately, we have very little real intelligence coming from the ground. We've relied on technical intelligence for so long, and having abandoned them in what the troops accurately called the Obama bug-out in December of 2011, there's very few people on the ground who would back us as they once did during the awakening. I was out there for that. Those who were in that book and those that you saw in the footage that we shot back then are now dead because they backed Americans. And they're not going to rise up and stand up for us again, whether they're Kurds or whether they're Sunnis.
Colonel Oliver North, thank you very much. We'll be right back.
Anytime, Martha.